Have you ever wondered why some women suddenly become unforgettable, even to the person who once ran from commitment? It's not magic, it's not manipulation, it's habits, subtle, powerful shifts that make even the most avoidant types stop, look back, and finally see her worth. When a woman stops chasing clarity and creates her own, everything shifts. Most people in avoidant relationships spend their emotional energy trying to decode vague messages, analyze mixed signals, and overthink every small interaction. They want certainty from someone who avoids it. But the moment she realizes that constantly asking, "What are we?" or "Where is this going?" only keeps her stuck in a loop of anxiety and unmet expectations, she begins to reclaim her power. The woman who learns to create clarity on her own terms no longer depends on someone else to define the relationship for her. She doesn't sit around hoping he will one day wake up and suddenly articulate his feelings with emotional fluency. She understands that if someone is avoidant, that's their pattern, not her puzzle to solve. So instead of pleading for answers, she starts setting the tone herself. She no longer waits to be chosen, she chooses. She doesn't linger in a relationship hoping it transforms into something more secure. She identifies what she needs, what makes her feel safe, seen, and emotionally nourished. And if that's not being offered, she doesn't get louder, more emotional, or more persuasive. She simply gets clearer. Clarity isn't about confrontation. It's about certainty within yourself. This woman knows what she's looking for. She doesn't go with the flow when the flow leads nowhere. She's not afraid to express her expectations, not as ultimatums, but as declarations of self-respect. She's not waiting for a green light from someone who keeps tapping the brakes. She says, "This is the kind of connection I want. This is the level of communication I need. This is how I show up in love." And then she watches what happens, not with desperation, but with calm observation. That's where the power lies. Avoidants often rely on emotional ambiguity. They benefit from keeping things undefined because it allows them to engage on their own terms without accountability. But when she introduces structure and emotional direction, it creates a challenge they've rarely encountered, someone who won't play their game. This woman also stops internalizing someone else's indecision. She doesn't take silence or withdrawal as a cue to overcompensate. She doesn't spiral into insecurity or try to become more agreeable to earn validation. Instead, she listens to what isn't being said and acts accordingly. She understands that a lack of clarity is clarity. If someone isn't meeting her emotionally, if they're dodging commitment, if they're inconsistent, that's all the information she needs. She doesn't sit in limbo. She moves forward, not because she's cold or uncaring, but because she's finally centered in her own emotional truth. And here's the thing, when she does this, it disrupts the entire dynamic. Avoidants often expect someone to adapt to their distance, to tolerate the instability, to keep showing up no matter how little they give. But she doesn't. She doesn't send the double text. She doesn't chase down explanations. She steps back, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because she respects herself too much to live in confusion. That clarity, quiet, grounded, unwavering, becomes the thing that speaks louder than words. It shifts the emotional tone of the relationship. She's no longer asking, "Do you see me?" She's already seen herself. She's no longer wondering if he values her. She's too busy valuing herself to wait around for his approval. And in that shift, something changes. The avoidant may not say it aloud, but the moment she stops searching for his clarity and starts living in her own, he begins to feel the weight of her absence in a way he never felt the weight of her presence. She builds a life that doesn't orbit around someone else's inconsistency. That shift alone changes everything. So many women lose themselves in the emotional unpredictability of an avoidant partner. They begin rearranging their schedules, their routines, and even their personalities to stay connected to someone who shows up sporadically. Their mood rises and falls with each text, each breadcrumb of attention, each appearance or disappearance. Without realizing it, their world starts to spin around someone else's pace, someone else's comfort zone, someone else's fear of intimacy. But the moment she decides to stop living on emotional standby and starts building a life that reflects her own needs, her own goals, her own rhythm, that's when the real transformation begins. This woman no longer puts her passions on pause, waiting for a message to arrive. She doesn't delay plans or shrink her world, hoping that being more available will finally make him stay. She realizes that centering her life around someone else's avoidance is the fastest way to lose her sense of self. So instead, she fills her days with things that bring her joy, meaning, and connection. She pours into friendships that reciprocate. She invests in her personal growth, her career, her health, her creativity. She schedules experiences that energize her, and she doesn't cancel those plans just because he suddenly decided to call or show interest after 3 days of silence. She is no longer waiting for him to make room for her. She's busy making space for herself. The beauty of this shift isn't just in how her life becomes fuller, but in how she starts to feel more emotionally grounded. Because when your world is small and centered around an emotionally unavailable person, it becomes dangerously easy to confuse anxiety with love. But when your life is rich, dynamic, and purpose-driven, you start to see more clearly what is and isn't worth your emotional energy. She starts recognizing the patterns, the late replies, the inconsistent effort, the reluctance to go deeper, and instead of interpreting them as challenges to solve, she sees them as red flags. Not because she's bitter, but because her life has become too full to accommodate uncertainty that doesn't serve her. And this isn't about pretending to be busy to get someone's attention. It's not a tactic. It's a genuine internal shift. She's no longer proving her worth through loyalty to someone who can't meet her halfway. She's no longer trying to be low maintenance, easygoing, or overly flexible in hopes that her willingness will make her lovable. She's simply living, fully, intentionally, unapologetically. And when she does that, something remarkable happens. She becomes less reactive to the push and pull of someone else's emotional distance. His unpredictability doesn't send her into panic mode anymore. It doesn't derail her week or occupy her every thought. She's rooted in a reality that doesn't depend on his participation. Avoidants are often drawn to people who center them. They feel safe knowing they can disappear and return without consequence. But when she breaks that pattern, when she shows that her world is moving forward regardless of whether he's in it, he starts to feel something different. Not control, not punishment, just space. And in that space, he begins to realize that she is no longer waiting in the shadows of his uncertainty. Her energy is elsewhere. Her focus is elsewhere. Her joy is coming from places that have nothing to do with him. And that quiet detachment, the kind that isn't performed but lived, can become the most powerful wake-up call. Because while he's still stuck navigating his fear of closeness, she's already discovered something better, a life that no longer shrinks to fit someone else's hesitation. She responds instead of reacting, calmly and confidently. This is one of the most powerful shifts a woman can make, especially when she's dealing with someone avoidant. In relationships where emotional inconsistency is the norm, the natural instinct is to react, to chase after clarity, to push for connection, to get louder when things go quiet. But reacting often comes from a place of emotional insecurity. It's fueled by fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of not being enough, fear of being abandoned. And those reactions, although deeply human, tend to reinforce the cycle. The avoidant withdraws, she panics, and the emotional gap between them only grows wider. But the moment she learns to respond instead, everything changes. Responding means pausing. It means breathing before speaking. It means letting the initial wave of emotion rise and fall before deciding what to do next. When a woman becomes aware of this space between the trigger and the response, she steps into emotional maturity. She starts to notice how much power she holds when she doesn't act out of impulse. When he pulls away, she doesn't scramble for validation. She doesn't fire off a string of texts trying to force connection. She observes. She evaluates. She asks herself, what's really happening here, and what do I want to do about it? Not, how can I get him to come closer? But how do I want to show up for myself in this moment? This kind of emotional composure is rare. And because it's rare, it stands out. Avoidants are used to people reacting. They're used to emotional outbursts, tears, confrontation, or cold silence. What they're not used to is calm accountability. When she can calmly say, I noticed you pulled away, and that doesn't feel good to me, and I want relationships where we show up consistently. It forces a different kind of dialogue. There's no drama, no guilt tripping, no emotional chaos. Just truth. Truth that's delivered without fear, but also without apology. She's not trying to control him. She's simply being clear about her needs and what she's willing to accept. This ability to respond also extends to how she handles her own emotions internally. Instead of being consumed by every shift in his behavior, she notices what it brings up for her without letting it drive her decisions. She might feel anxious. She might feel rejected. She might feel that old familiar urge to fix things. But instead of acting on those feelings immediately, she becomes curious about them. She gives herself space to feel without spiraling. She journal about it, talk to a trusted friend, or sit quietly until the emotion softens. This doesn't make her cold or detached. It makes her emotionally intelligent. She's no longer ruled by the fear of losing someone, and that inner stillness creates a kind of unshakable presence. The strength in this approach is that it sets a tone. It communicates self-worth without having to say a word. It says, I'm not afraid to feel my emotions, but I won't let them compromise my standards. It says, I care about this connection, but not at the cost of my peace. And most importantly, it says, I'm in control of how I respond to life, even when other people are unpredictable. That kind of presence makes her feel safe to herself, and it also unsettles the avoidant, not in a manipulative way, but because it breaks the cycle. He can no longer hide behind her reactions to justify his distance. He's now faced with a calm mirror, one that reflects the reality of his behavior without exaggeration, without blame. And that mirror doesn't beg, it doesn't plead, it doesn't panic. It simply stands, clear and steady, showing him exactly what he's doing and exactly who she's becoming in the process. She respects her own boundaries more than she needs his approval. That alone is a powerful shift that most people never see coming, especially those who are used to crossing lines without consequence. When a woman begins to hold herself to a standard where her peace, her self-respect, and her emotional safety come first, something changes in how she moves through a relationship. She stops operating from a place of fear that setting a boundary will scare him off, fear that saying no will make her less lovable, fear that expressing discomfort will make her seem difficult. Instead, she starts listening to the part of her that speaks the quietest but holds the deepest truth. The part that knows when something feels off, when something crosses a line, when something asks her to trade her integrity for temporary connection. For a long time, she may have allowed subtle disrespect. She may have excused broken promises, emotional unavailability, last-minute cancellations, or inconsistent behavior as normal, telling herself that if she's just more patient or more understanding, things will get better. But eventually she realizes that every time she stays silent when her values are compromised, she chips away at her own self-worth. So she chooses something different. She begins to treat her boundaries not as walls to keep love out, but as doors that only open to what aligns with her. She stops waiting for permission to express her needs. She starts making her emotional well-being the non-negotiable foundation of any relationship she entertains. This woman doesn't scream her boundaries or weaponize them. She lives them. They show up in small, consistent actions. If someone says they'll call and doesn't, she doesn't chase. If someone goes cold without explanation, she doesn't fill the silence with justifications. If someone treats her casually while she's offering commitment, she doesn't shrink her standards to fit their capacity. She walks away, not out of bitterness, but out of loyalty to herself. She understands that her boundary is not a demand. It's an invitation. It says, this is how I love, this is how I show up, and this is what I will allow in my life. Anything less doesn't need to be punished, just released. What makes this even more powerful is that she no longer ties her worth to someone else's reaction. She no longer abandons herself in exchange for validation. If someone can't meet her boundary, she doesn't see that as a reflection of her value. She sees it as a sign of their readiness. And that difference is everything. She doesn't bend because she's afraid of losing someone. She trusts that the right person won't be lost through honesty. She knows that people who are capable of real connection won't be threatened by healthy limits. They'll be drawn to them. because those limits don't come from control, they come from self-awareness. Avoidants often operate in spaces without boundaries. They rely on emotional gray areas to keep things undefined, to avoid responsibility, to create just enough connection to feel safe, but never enough to feel vulnerable. But when she introduces clear lines, not with drama, but with consistency, she creates an emotional structure that they're not used to. Suddenly, they're no longer in control of the pace. They can't test how much they can withdraw before she comes running. She won't. Not because she doesn't care, but because she cares about herself more than she cares about winning someone who doesn't know how to stay. That kind of self-respect doesn't show up loud or flashy. It shows up in her quiet decisions, in what she allows and what she walks away from. It shows up in how she no longer asks for someone to treat her right. She simply makes space only for those who do. She masters emotional independence. Love is a choice, not a lifeline. This shift is subtle on the outside, but radical on the inside. It's when a woman finally understands that the deepest form of security isn't found in someone else's presence, but in her own emotional stability. For too long, she may have associated love with need, thinking that closeness means dependency, that attachment means sacrifice, that connection means surrendering her emotional center to someone else's behavior. But then she realizes that love isn't meant to drown her. It's meant to flow with her. It's not a lifeline she grabs onto out of fear of being alone. It's a gift she chooses to give from a place of strength, not survival. Avoidants tend to pull away from people who seem too dependent on them for emotional regulation. It overwhelms them. It triggers their need for space. And when a woman is constantly anxious about whether she's being loved enough, chosen enough, seen enough, she inadvertently reinforces their fear of being consumed. But when she no longer needs love to rescue her, she becomes someone entirely different. She becomes the woman who can sit with her own emotions without needing someone to fix them. She becomes the woman who can feel lonely without it meaning she's unloved. She becomes the woman who can feel disappointed without spiraling into self-doubt. That kind of emotional independence isn't about being detached. It's about being whole. She starts to source her validation internally instead of waiting for someone else to offer it. She no longer waits for a text message to feel good about herself. She doesn't need constant reassurance to know she's valuable. She stops trying to read between the lines of every interaction, searching for clues that she matters. She knows she matters. She's built that truth brick by brick through every moment of self-reflection, through every time she sat in discomfort and chose not to numb it, through every time she faced her fears and chose growth over familiarity. And because of that, she no longer enters relationships with a void she hopes someone else will fill. She brings her own fullness to the table. This woman doesn't idealize love. She respects it. She sees it as something sacred, but not something that defines her identity. She knows that her worth doesn't increase just because someone chooses her, and it doesn't decrease if someone leaves. She no longer tries to morph into someone else's fantasy to feel worthy of love. She stays grounded in who she is, flaws, strengths, and all. And in doing so, she starts to attract a different kind of energy. Because emotional independence doesn't repel intimacy. It enhances it. It creates space for genuine connection instead of emotional enmeshment. It allows love to breathe, not suffocate. Avoidants are often drawn to people who need them just enough to chase, but not enough to stay. But when she's no longer chasing, no longer clinging, no longer trying to earn love through performance or sacrifice, she becomes a mirror that reflects back to them their own emotional limits. She doesn't play games. She doesn't pretend not to care. She cares deeply, but not desperately. She knows how to give without losing herself. She knows how to receive without becoming dependent. She knows how to walk away, not out of pride, but out of deep inner trust. Trust that she will be okay with or without them. Trust that love will find her again, not because she needs it, but because she is already complete. And in that quiet, confident completeness, she becomes unforgettable to the very person who once kept her at a distance.